Kia ora rā, te whānau, nē rata mia kia koutou ko tāua nei ko tēnei rā. Ko raku manga te maunga, ko I pipiri te moana, ko nā toki matapaurua te waka, ko nā pui te iwi, ko nā te kuta me patu ki nā hapu, ko David Hakaraia, toko ingoa. Kia ora. So I'm here today to talk, probably more to talk about my work. So when I was first asked to come here, I was doing the 10-minute talk. So now I'm doing the half an hour. Yeah, so I guess to give you a better understanding of where I'm coming from, maybe give you a bit of a background of where I'm from, and so I was brought up in between Tokoroa and the Waikato, and up in the Bay of Islands and Rāwhiri and Russell, and so I didn't have much of I guess I didn't go to school very much. I finished quite young and ended up working in the bush for a few years, and yeah, did my thing, got into a bit of trouble and ended up in the Navy, so where I did engineering and sort of got a skill out of it and learnt about diesel engines and gas turbines. So I've always been a bit of a maker. My father was an engineer, so we had welders in the welders and lathes in the workshop that we had, so I was always playing around with those. And I guess, like I said, I'm a maker, and so when I got out of the Navy, I went to design school thinking I was going to be an architect, but ended up actually doing industrial design. It was more around my skill base, and growing up, with my family, I had aunties that were weavers, and so doing korowai, and then I had a couple of uncles that were carvers, so I've been brought up around it. I'll be honest with you, I probably wasn't that interested in it when I was younger, and so when I finally got to design school, I sort of went back and started talking to my family and talking to friends and sort of using it in my work. And I initially a lot of the time it was when it was like 2000, and there weren't really many Māori or Pacific Islanders at the school. I think there were maybe 20, if that. And so it was sort of new to all of us, and we all sort of hung out together. There was an area that all the Māori and Pacific kids would hang out, and I met my partner, who's Fijian, and so yeah, it was good, and it was sort of, we were learning how we could tell our own stories or our own narratives, and I mean at some of the time it was a little bit hard because I was sort of doing it with a lot of my work, and sometimes I felt like that maybe some of the lecturers didn't really understand it, or maybe it was just rubbish work. But yeah, so I went on and I did my undergrad, and then spent a bit of time over in London and a couple of years in Japan, and then came back and did my postgrad, my masters, and so what I based that around was sort of digital technology, telling narratives. And I guess for my precedence or my inspiration was looking, as I said, at traditional techniques like whakairo, rāranga and tamoko, so tattoo, weaving and carving. And then it was, like I said, I didn't have much of an academic background, so I found it quite hard to write. And although I love reading books, when you're doing it to write research, it's I find it a little bit difficult. So one of the things I did is that I started going out, because I had my supervisors at the school and they were really good academically, but I didn't have that sort of what would you call it, that cultural connection apart from my family. So I had to go out and sort of find people out there that were working in the contemporary field. And so I got to meet like Rangi Kipa, Lisa Reihana, Roy Toia, Karen Wilson, Lionel Grant, who's a carver who carved the wharenui at Unitec. So I got to talk to them, and for me it was sort of understanding their process and how they went about telling the stories, whether it was their iwi stories or just stories to do with their hapu or their local area. It was quite interesting. So it was almost like they were creating their own tikanga or their own process, and using new technologies and new materials, and it was quite inspiring. And saying that these are guys that I interviewed that I didn't really know, and it's been a few years since then. So since then I've been able to work with these guys, or work with mostly with Rangi Kippa quite a bit. And it's been it's opened up my eyes to, and it's also taught me how to employ traditional knowledge in new ways. Like I said, I was at Victoria University, and so we're sort of known for digital fabrication, digital technology, so 3D printing, laser cutters, and 3D milling. And I was, I guess, when I first went there, it was just milling, and they'd just got a laser cutter, and so 3D printing was quite new. But it was exciting, and it was, along with learning more about my own culture, I was learning about these new technologies. So it was quite fun to have a bit of a play around with them. And then like I said, I went through and for my masters I came up with the idea. Traditionally, like a lot of Māori implements before colonisation, so they were carved, and so they used these implements, but they also had a story to it, so they were sort of intrinsic to one another, these pieces that were art pieces but were used in everyday life. And so there was sort of this sort of separation, through the classical period of Māori where, sort of the implements were implements, and then sort of the art went off and they had these beautiful carvings. And so for me, like, I guess I sort of found myself at university, and I was looking at what inspired me and what I enjoyed doing, which was making, and so furniture. And so for me it was creating bits of furniture that told these Māori narratives that I'd grown up with, like Maui, and about the gods, Tāne Mahuta, and sort of adding the story back into these everyday implements. Although we didn't traditionally have furniture, that's what I chose as my vehicle to create these works. So Te Toi Ora, the art of living, is what I came up with, and so I think it's probably easier for me to just talk about the pieces that I made and that I came up with and how I approached it. And, so every design, has a narrative, whether it's intentional or not. And for me, it was the intention of putting those Māori narratives into the design. So this one here was based around the separation of Ranganui and Papatūānuku. So if most of you from New Zealand will understand that. So it's the separation of them by their children, Tāne Mahuta. So he's the major player in the story, and that he got down on his back and he separated his parents. And for me, when I'm creating work and when I'm imbuing a narrative into it, everything that I use, whether it's the materials or the process or the way that I position those materials, all add to the story. So nothing in there should be arbitrary. It's that all has that meaning to it. So what I did for the table itself is that so Maui is made out of tanikaha. So tanikaha is a traditional wood that they use for boat building, but they also used to use it for taiha down in the South Island. And so it was using that and then sort of steam bending it and then coming up with these forms and like I do lots of iterations and lots of sketching, but then I also use a lot of digital fabrication software to make my designs. So like using 3ds Max or SolidWorks, and the hard thing I think is that you know, when you're creating in a computer that's, you know, so big, you know, you're putting dimensions to it and the scale doesn't look quite, well, you think it looks all right. It's not until you actually go out and start to build it, you know, and explore the materials that, you know, it changes it a little bit. Initially when I did it, I made it out of cardboard, so I you know, got all the measurements and dimensions and laser cut the card out and put it together, and it ended up looking like a, you know, huge sort of boat sort of thing, so it didn't really quite work out. And so yeah, and I think, I don't know if it's a problem, but what I see is I see a lot of you know, students in the class, and they go out and they do a lot of rendering of their pieces, and that's fine. But I think you know, it's also exploring the materials themselves, understanding the materials and the working of those materials and how they might work. Yeah, so like I said, Maui, the main player, and he's separating his mother and father. He's taken root into the earth. So it's made out of a hydrostone. And then I used a knotted ridge technique to bind it using wax string, so the same, and I'll probably show it somewhere further down the track. The knotted ridges where they lash taonga, so like bone carvings and pounamu, and then the idea that, you know, the branches of Tane Mahuta, the god of the forest, you know, so that tentative touch to the heavens. And then, yeah, so it's sort of showing him under strain and pushing them apart, and then on the side were these little bone inserts that were laser etched, and that sort of just held in the bolts that held the table together. But then in the story, there's like, you know, there's quite a few brothers, and but what I did was took the main characters, and so, like I said, everything had meaning behind it, right down to the material that I chose. The cardboard, yeah, and just the process of making the formers and stuff and using digital technology. Obviously, it speeds up the process. Like I've done a lot of steam bending in the past, and, you know, sort of, you know, using a chalk and a bit of string to do an arc and stuff. So it did speed up the process. And just trying different bits of material. I tried a whole bunch of different native timbers to steam bend, and some of them didn't quite work out. Yeah, so yeah, it was a good process and a long process. Like I had a year for my masters, so you had to write a thesis, and then I had maybe 7 or 8 pieces of furniture at the same time making them. So it was quite a lot of work, and but it was enjoyable. And like I said, going out and meeting some of these Māori artists that are working in this sort of contemporary field. I'm sort of talking to some of them now. They don't like the word contemporary. They say it's not so much contemporary, but an evolution of who we are. So I think a lot of people think, when they think Māori, they think of that classical period with all those beautiful carvings and stuff. But the reality is that we're always moving forward. So we're always evolving. So Mahuka, again, let's see. Yeah, so based on how Maui went to the underworld and got fire from his grandmother Mahuka. So the idea was sort of an abstraction of the fingernail and then the lighting it up. A lot of the times with my pieces, it's you know, you're almost a player in that narrative too. So with this, you know, he went to the underworld, he got the fingernail of fire and brought it back, and so that's how we found out, you know, how fire came to the world. And so the materials for this was using porcelain, so casting porcelain, so it represented the underworld, you know, the sort of like the clay, and then also in Māoridom, I think it's komako, and geez, I can't remember the other timber, but the 2 timbers that you work together to make fire. So that's the 2 here with the 2 timbers there, and you can't quite see it. But it was sort of, like I said, each piece was imbuing a bit of myself inside it. So and I'll show you as I go further on. But the base that is made out of the two timbers, where they're joined together, is actually a topography of the area from where I'm from up north, so Rafuri. So yeah, so I was putting a bit of myself inside there, and it was again another learning experience and learning about porcelain and sort of making the form on the CNC machine. But yeah, not realising that when you cast porcelain, it shrinks by, I don't know, 15, 10, 12%. So I had to sort of, yeah, it was like I said, a learning experience. But again, with the whole, you know, the light behind it, so it had RGB in it, so it could change colours. But the whole process of it had a charging port, but you could pick it up and walk around the space of it. So almost like Maui with the fire, picking up that fire and walking out. So yeah, like I said, I guess the people using it become part of that narrative. Just a few things, you know. I was looking at you know, motif, especially from the far north. So the idea of you know, creating these sort of boxes that you know, represented who I am, using digital fabrication. And like I said, there was quite a lot of overlap between my work. So like I'd start doing one design, and some of the elements that I used would cross over to other designs. So yeah, it was a fun experience, and like they gave me like after access to all the machines, and I had my own space in the workshop, so it was good. You know, like I said, I am a maker, so I was making everything right down to the screws. Yeah, and then like I said, you know, looking at Ngāpuhi icons and you know, understanding them, you know, because a person that looks at the work obviously can see, you know, Ngāpuhi, that's where I'm from, but there might be other guys that would be able to break it down further and look at the motif in there and understand that motif is from Ngāpuhi. This one here, Puipuiaki, is you know, the treasure box. So it's a bit of furniture that I made with Earl Stewart, and so the idea is, you know, like a carving tells a story. You know, there's like I said, motif on there, and it might represent a certain area within New Zealand, and I guess some of the time it's very esoteric, so only maybe the artist will understand, but there are, you know, particular motif in there that people can, you know, if you know Māori carving, then you can get a better understanding of that narrative. And so I wanted to try and do that, and I started again, you know, using the CNC machine and using topographies from Google Maps, so from where I was from and stuff. And initially, when I was looking at, you know, that separation, I was looking at Ranganui and Papatuanuku, and so, like I said, there was a lot of crossover between the work that I was doing. But then I was also looking at, you know, tukutuku panels, and, you know, the narrative behind that. And initially, I thought that's sort of what I wanted to do with I mean, because there was so much wastage at the school with material-wise, that I was able to, you know, quite a lot of the work that I made, I could get materials just from wastage. So I was sort of looking at that abstraction of the tukutuku panel, you know, and making a few things, and I was going to have that on the of the front of this here. So what it actually is if you can see, there's sort of a patchwork on one side, and then there's the sort of monolithic side, you know, white side to it. I shouldn't say white side, but it was sort of a representation of who we were. Both of us were from Ngāpuhi, around the same area, and so we understand. You know, we've got this. You know, we've got our hapu. I know where we're from. I know all my family, but then we've got this European side. We're both Scottish, and I know nothing about it, so we sort of left that blank. And then for like I said, I was looking at the tukutuku panel, and it didn't quite work out. And so again, I started looking at the CNC and the topography of the land that we were from, and so I sort of took that and then optimized it in a program. So what it did, it took out all the curves and made it quite faceted. So there was still that sort of connection between the triangular shapes of the tuku panels that I was trying to do, but then also, again, you know, like I said, with the carving, it sort of imbued with your you know, your where you're from, the land itself, and so, you know, on there was the land that we're from up north, sort of abstracted a little bit. And then, and like I said, with the treasure box, there were special areas. So when you opened it up, there were drawers inside there. They had special meaning to both of us. You know, like you know, where my father was born, the land that I own, and so that whole idea, or the treasure for me was the land itself, and so it was put into these drawers here. And then with this one here was a light that I created using the laser cutter. Again, adding, you know, Māori Pacific motif to the design. Initially, like I said, lots of drawings, lots of little model making, and then using software to come up with some designs. So this was one of the initial designs that I came up with, and it, you know, going from this and then making it, it didn't quite work out. So I sort of took a step back and went on again. Then I started looking at 3D printing. You know, the idea of looking at a hinaki, because for the design itself, it was, you know, how Maui captured the sun, and, you know, how he pulled up Aotearoa, or the North Island, and you know, so that representation, or that story of by how you captured the sun. And so I did this, you know, because I was looking at digital fabrication. Initially I was looking at 3D printing before we had 3D printing at the school, and I came up with this idea of this digital weave, and it looked, you know, with the lighting and stuff, it looked quite nice, but it was, you know, like a couple $100 or something that big at the time, so I probably wasn't prepared to pay. So yeah, got a little bit expensive testing that out, and again I took that step back, and then you know, I was looking at you know, tamoko and carving, and so I came up with this idea, you know, that my inspiration was, in the end, you know, wakahuia, treasure storage box, and then, like I said, the knotted bridge technique that I used on Ranganui and Papatuanuku for the binding of the feet. So I looked at that, and that was sort of my inspiration behind the lights. You know, and again, you know, adding that motif, it was a representation of who I was. Yeah, and then I think a lot of the time, and I must admit, it was me when I first started using this stuff, you know, the technology is driving you, but you want to be able to drive that technology. I think yeah, I see it at the school where guys go, oh yeah, I can go make a model on the laser cutter, it's, you know, easy. You know, they put in the coding or whatever it is, and it's done. And I think we fall into the trap of using this technology because it's easy, and I think you want to be able to push what you can do with this technology, whether it's laser cutters, CNC machines, or 3D printing. And I think for me, the complexity was not the actual technology itself, but the material that I was using, because I was using, you know, 0.3 veneer. Getting the cut right, so when you picked it up, it didn't just disintegrate on you. And I tried a whole bunch of different materials. So you know, because it was about telling my story. Like, obviously, I tried a lot of New Zealand timber or veneers to etch into it, and yeah, I just couldn't get it to work with any of the native timbers like I liked. And I ended up using American oak, just because it gave the qualities that I wanted. So the idea with this is, when the light's off, you actually don't see the pattern. All you see is the grain of the wood, which was quite beautiful. So I had that sort of sunburst running through it, and it's not until you turn the light on that it reveals the pattern, reveals the design, or sort of reveals the culture behind it. And then what I did to put it all together is painstakingly did the knotted ridge lashing on the sides to put it together, which took a long time, and with the ones that I've done, if this was to go into mass production, I'm probably not going to lash each one. So coming up with a design that you can connect it together. Yeah, so the American oak, so like I said, was quite a beautiful, and then was trying to keep it, rigid afterwards. So trying different plastics and how you would stick it to it, and yeah, it was a pretty big process and a lot of learning. And like I said, there was a lot of crossover, doing elements and burning into the bone. And I think my and just some of the other work I've done during that period. So I think for me, when I first initially, like I said, I've always been a hands-on maker, and when I started learning about digital technology, so yeah, this is it. This is what I want to do, and now I've sort of taken a step back. I still love using it, but I think it's more to complement my work. So like I'm really into craftsman and making stuff and hands-on stuff, and I think it's. I had the chance to go up to Puia, the carving school, and they're sort of looking at what we do at the school, and and just through talking through with some of the guys or artists that I know, it's the thing is with a carver, if you look at a carving, you can see where the carvers use their chisel, and they've left the maker's mark inside there. So there's I think there's a bit more soul to it, and I think what guys are trying to find out now is how you can add a bit of yourself or a bit of soul to the digital technology that you're using. And I think in some cases, I don't know, it's 1 minute. Some cases it's like with a carver, when he looks at a bit of timber, it changes. So like he doesn't have a set pattern, it might be knots in the wood, or the grain might run a certain way, and so he's got to change the way that he's carving that bit of wood. And that was interesting for me to learn all that stuff. And like I said, it's made me I love digital technology, but I also like craftsmanship, and so marrying those two together, and just using that process on one of the bigger lights that I did. And a few other things that I've done, but yeah, cool. Geez, that went fast. Cool. Oh yeah, sweet. Yep.
Hang on, I'll just get the mic to you.
Okay. You reflected that story is really important as a part of your artwork, and that it actually is the piece in the end. Is it really important for the viewer to understand that?
Yeah, because I took some of this work over to New York, and it was quite interesting listening to guys. The thing with it is, what I wanted from it is, although that's my story and my narrative, and people can derive their own stories from it. So I think, like I said, it's quite esoteric. The artist has only got to know really what it fully means, but people might be able to pull parts of the story out just because of the way it's positioned or the material that you've used. And so yeah, it was quite interesting for people to listen to how they thought the story was. So yeah, I mean, in the end, it's telling my stories, but anybody can make their own story from it. Yeah, cool, sweet. Anybody else?
Great. Thank you so much, David. That's fantastic.